Hello everyone, and welcome to Edison TV. My name is Aaron Atkar, and I'm a healthcare analyst here at Edison. We're joined today by Stefan Weber, CEO of Newron Pharmaceuticals. Newron is a specialist in CNS drug developments, with its lead clinical asset gearing up for a registrational Phase III program in schizophrenia. Welcome, Stefan.
Thank you, Aaron, for having us. It's my absolute pleasure to join you.
Excellent. So to jump straight into it, Newron's launching its registrational ENIGMA-TRS Phase III program in treatment-resistant schizophrenia. So can you provide an overview of the trial designs, the endpoints agreed upon with regulators, and the expected timelines for the program?
Oh, absolutely. I think we are really proud that after last year's Phase II and Phase II/III results, we got the agreement with all the key regulators, US, Europe, and around the world to start our pivotal program. And that is very special because evenamide, our compound, is the first drug in schizophrenia that works by a glutamatergic mechanism of action, which supports and helps the vast majority of today's schizophrenic patients, those who are treatment resistant and those who are poor responders to any of today's medications. And it will still and confirmed to be the only add-on therapy ever to be approved in schizophrenia after the late Phase III failure of the Cobenfy. So to get the buy-in from all the key regulators to take this into a Phase III regulatory program that could support submission of an NDA by end of next year is a key achievement. So this ENIGMA-TRS program consists of two pivotal studies. ENIGMA-TRS-1 will be a double-blind placebo-controlled study, a version of the Phase II study that we had last year. So it is the first ever one-year pivotal program in treatment-resistant schizophrenia, 52 weeks. Double-blind placebo-controlled study. It will be performed in study centers in Europe, Asia, Latin America, and Canada. What we will do is we will take in patients who are diagnosed as treatment-resistant schizophrenics according to the TRIP criteria. Those patients will have a BPRS, which is the pre-psychiatric rating scale, score of at least 45. They will have a CGIS of mildly to severely ill, means 3 to 6. And they will have prominent symptoms as per the BPRS. So these are the inclusion criteria. Each and any of those patients will be on a stable dose of either an oral or an injected current antipsychotic, the best choice at a therapeutic dose, the best choice of medication, standard of care the doctor can give them. Now, what we will do is, and that's very important, we did that also in the Phase III study last year. Before we randomize the patient, we start with about 900 candidates who we put into a 42-day screening period. And we will check, obviously, for the confirmation of the treatment resistance and meeting the criteria. But very importantly, what we will do is we will take 3 times plasma levels of the current antipsychotics, because in our Phase III study last year, we saw that more than 30% of patients who wanted to get into the study were not compliant. They took whatever medication, no medication, 2 medications, but they didn't take the one drug at the levels they should have taken them. We will make sure any patient who wants to be randomized will meet the inclusion criteria and will take the drug that he claims to take. And then we will have a final choice of an international eligibility committee, which is headed by John Kane. Those guys will look at each and any patient's data and by the same criteria on everybody in all the territories will take a final decision if that patient is allowed in. So those patients will then be randomized. We will take them into an add-on treatment, and we will have patients either placebo added to their current medication or low-dose 15 mg BID or high-dose 30 mg BID as an add-on to their current standard of care. After 12 weeks, we will have the first readout, and the primary efficacy endpoint will be the PANSS total, which is the regulatory endpoint, nothing to dispute. And the key secondary endpoint will be the CGIS, the change from baseline. That readout after 12 weeks will be what we need to start submitting the NDA, because the FDA endpoint is 12 weeks. But we will go on double-blind placebo-controlled, no re-randomization after 12 weeks. We will go on for up to 26 weeks, and we'll have the maintenance endpoint, which is very important because on the basis of a positive outcome, the European Medicines Agency has agreed that we will not have to do a relapse prevention study, which is, by the way, completely unethical in TRS. And we will again measure the efficacy endpoint being the PANSS total change. And then we will still go on for the full 52 weeks. Never done before by any company in treatment-resistant schizophrenia, but based on those extremely promising results we had in the phase 2 in treatment-resistant when we saw ever-increasing efficacy up to 1 year. That is ENIGMA-TRS 1. ENIGMA-TRS 2 will be the second pivotal study. While ENIGMA-TRS 1 has already been initiated, TRS 2 will be initiated around October. This study will be 12 weeks only, so absolutely in line with what the FDA expects to submit an NDA. And it will be 400 patients only, and it will be 200 on placebo added to their current standard of care, and 200 at 15 milligram BID added to their current standard of care. Everything else will be exactly like in TRS 1. TRS 2 will be starting in US study centers, which is obviously very important. And it will be expanded to the other territories and become thus an international study as we get more proceeds on board. On the timelines for both studies, we expect that in fourth quarter and end 2026, we would have the 12 weeks results and would get ready to submit an NDA, which obviously is extremely important and a key milestone then on our ends. I think that's fairly representing the pivotal program. Might have taken slightly more longer than it should have, but I think that was necessary. It is an extraordinary program, first drug ever, and if it could confirm anything close to what we saw in that phase 2 study up to 1 year, that would be just making it a landmark study.
Absolutely. That's great to hear all the details. You touched upon it, but schizophrenia has sort of been more in the headlines since the approval of BMS's Cobenfy. But we understand that evenamide's targeting a slightly different population. So can you tell us a bit more about the setting that Newron's targeting and then the market opportunity for this space?
Let me start with the schizophrenia market as it is today. I mean, we are speaking about 1% of the global population suffering from schizophrenia. That's an enormous number. Now, you could say, well, we have dozens of drugs on the market. Everything should be fine. Now, the problem with the treatments we have on the market today is that their efficacy is limited, both to the level of improvement and time-wise. And at all today's medications, if it is the first or second generation, or if we now talk about Cobenfy, being something different, slightly different, doesn't matter. The side effects are terrible. We have a pound weight gain per week of treatment. We have sexual dysfunction. We have hormonal changes, Parkinson's-like symptoms. Now, the good news is that Cobenfy doesn't have plenty of that. But Cobenfy, being a cholinergic receptor drug, even if it is amended and improved, and those side effects are ameliorated by adding trospium, we still have about 40% of patients with nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, constipation, which is bad enough. But the real point is, we have about 1/3 of the population that nicely responds to today's monotherapy antipsychotics. Whichever drug it is, 1/3 responds nicely. On the other hand, we have 30 to 50% of patients who are treatment resistant. 30% are those who are diagnosed, and 50% is what, if you speak to doctors, is the real number. And if you ask them, why are those 20% not diagnosed, doctors would say, well, I have nothing to offer but clozapine, a drug from the 80s, which is completely underused. Only 5% of the US TRS patients will take the only approved drug, which is clozapine. Now, in between those patients who are well taken care of, and those who are treatment resistant, we have that large chunk of patients who we call poor responders. That is a group of patients which initially got the benefits from today's antipsychotics, but then they are fading in towards treatment resistance. And that is nicely documented by the Katie study, which shows that once you are into the disease for a number of years, your response to the medications gets worse and worse. And on average, every 18 months, 72% of patients will change their medication. It's just switching from one monotherapy antipsychotic to another. It's just a switching of drugs and slightly side effects. But there has never been any single study which shows that this switching or an add-on of label does any good. We see plenty of polypharmacy without any evidence that this is really helping patients. So there's a huge unmet medical need for a drug with a truly differentiated mechanism and a first add-on therapy. Why is there no add-on in schizophrenia? Because the FDA rightfully says all drugs are working by dopaminergic mechanism. And though an add-on is just an increase of dose, there's no good to it. Here comes the only and the first drug working by glutamate. So that is why evenamide is different. And this is nicely documented by late research done by the Pittsburgh University and Dr. Crace, and that will be published also in the next few months. So what Dr. Crace has found is that schizophrenia is really a disease that starts at the hippocampus. Now, unfortunately, all today's drugs work 4 levels down on the dopaminergic pathway. So they are not targeted to the origin of the disease. And obviously, the side effects are widespread if you don't hit the real target. Now, Dr. Grace has executed the MAM model, which is well known and will probably become the gold standard in schizophrenia. And what he has shown is that in the hippocampus, you see a major impact of this disease on the neuronal activity, on cognition and negative symptoms. And evenamide was the only drug, when given in his model, did improve all of those right at the source at the hippocampus. Evenamide acts at the hippocampus. It reverses the neuron hyperactivity. It normalizes the VTA dopamine neuron activity. It impacts the lateral VTA dopamine. And importantly, what we saw is that the time that evenamide worked, the benefits it had, went on for hours and hours after the drug was no longer in the body. And that is part of the magic behind that 1-year improvement that we have seen in the phase 2 study. And evenamide normalized cognition, and it normalized social approach and behavior in those animals. So there's plenty of evidence here that evenamide is a truly differentiated drug, and that evenamide does not only help patients who are treatment resistant and poor responders, which is, as I have to say again, the vast majority of patients. So if you want to see how evenamide is different, well, you have those drugs which are all today's antipsychotics, including Cobenfy, who work directly, indirectly via dopamine, and they do well on 30% patients. And you have 70% patients who urgently need a new medication, and that is evenamide. So the market opportunity is huge. Being the only add-on therapy, it can be added to each and any antipsychotic, and very importantly, this is the first drug ever when added to clozapine has shown improvement on top and with clozapine. So that's the advantage and the promise of evenamide.
Excellent. So we see that there's a lot of enthusiasm and optimism there from Newron's management team, and that's based on this encouraging track record of evenamide in the clinic. So can you share some more details on some of the clinical highlights?
Yes. So let me guide you through the key points that we found in our phase 2 and phase 2/3 study, which have been published last year and have been also scientifically published, so the publications are available by now. So the first study was the phase 2 study in 161 patients who were treatment-resistant diagnosed. And what we did in those patients, we gave them evenamide on top of their current standard of care, whatever the doctor believed was the right therapy, and we did that for 1 year. And the first absolutely stunning thing we saw was that patients were staying in that study, because usually what you see in TRS studies is that after 4 weeks, 6 weeks, a drove of patients, like 30%, leaves the study because A, the side effects are unbearable, or B, there is just no benefit. As treatment-resistant patients, you do not expect any more improvement. You have tried everything. So patients stayed in the study for 6 weeks. And then we asked patients, you want to go on up to 1 year? And 90% of those patients who were still in said, yes, we want to go on. And at the end of 1 year, we still had more than 80% of patients in the study completing it. That was the first major exciting news, because it tells you this drug is safe. We had not a single relapse in that 1 year, not one. And the drug shows some benefit, because no patient in that population would stay for 1 year if he doesn't see improvement. Then we looked at the regulatory endpoints, so PANSS total, obviously, and the CGI-S, the CGI-C, and the level of functioning. And what we saw after 6 weeks was a kind of moderate improvement, like 12% improvement on the PANSS total. And people said, yeah, but look, this could be a typical placebo effect. So 10, 12, 15% is the standard placebo response we see in schizophrenia studies lately. And we said, yeah, that's fair. So we looked again after 6 months. And importantly, the efficacy went up to 16%. And when we looked at the responder rates, because you want to look at responders to be sure that it's not just a few super performers who spoil the mean change. So responders was even more impressive, because the number of patients who improved by at least 20%, which is the regulatory requirement in TRS, went from 15 to 30%, so doubled. So patients who saw an improvement stayed and kept the improvement. And other patients who had not responded after 6 weeks, after 6 months, were responders. And that percentage of patients almost tripled to 43% at 1 year. And when we looked at the clinical global impression of change, we saw exactly the same picture, and level of functioning the same. So the stunning thing is, completely unexpected and not explainable and never seen before in treatment resistant, we saw 1 year improvement, permanent stable improvement up to 1 year. And it obviously doesn't stop there. It's just that we stopped the study there. Then we looked at the inclusion criteria. So the key criteria which we used to include patients, and we looked how many of the patients would by end of 1 year still fulfill the criteria. And it was 50% who did no longer fulfill the criteria after 1 year. And then we went one step ahead and we said, look, the final litmus test, that's really the level of symptoms no longer being visible. So do we have patients in remission, which is not described in treatment-resistant schizophrenia as a consequence of being given a drug? And we saw, regardless of which criteria, the toughest one requires that patients should be for 6 months practically without symptoms, and 25% of our patients fulfilled that top criteria. So 25% of our patients in that 1 year study were free from symptoms for at least 6 months. Now, we got a lot of beating for that study because there were 2 caveats. Number one, it was mostly performed in Indian study centers because of COVID. And the number 2 was, well, it was not placebo controlled. And yes, everybody said, look, we cannot explain how placebo would create that effect. What we can tell you is if those results can be repeated in double-blind placebo-controlled studies, they are unseen and unheard of. So it was very important that just a few months later, in April and May, we had 2 disclosures on a phase 2/3 double-blind placebo-controlled study with evenamide as an add-on treatment to current standard of care in patients who were poor responders. So on average, not yet treatment resistant, but on their way, like 70% overlap of patients between poor responders and treatment resistant. That study was only 4 weeks long, which is what FDA says these days. After 4 weeks, you see if an antipsychotic works or not. And this study was run in 11 countries and 291 patients. So fulfilling all the criteria that you want. And what we saw was absolutely confirming, even in 4 weeks, what we saw in that 1 year open label study. Because in the phase 2/3 double-blind placebo-controlled study, 11 countries, what we saw is when we added evenamide to the best-selling antipsychotics of this world, and we included 14% patients on clozapine, what we saw was highly statistically significant efficacy on all the key endpoints: PANSS total, CGI-S, CGI-C. And we saw highly statistically significant responder rates. And what we saw, exactly like in the 1 year study, even better after 4 weeks compared to the 6 weeks readout from the open label study. We saw responder rates slowly and steadily differentiating from placebo, and the gap always widening up to day 29. So with those results, we decided it was time to go to the regulators in the US, Europe, and around the world and say, look, we want a phase III program that will be good to get to the NDA level. And as you know, TRS is seen as an area of high unmet medical need. In principle, it would be sufficient if you had one sufficiently positive phase III study in order to get this drug approved. That was our plan initially, but I would say that we have decided to go for 2 parallel pivotal studies just to make absolutely sure there's no risk here, and there's no chance of any delay, because we might have to repeat one study which barely misses whatever the regulators deem to be sufficiently positive. That's why we go for 2 studies in parallel. One is that landmark study, double-blind placebo-controlled, 1 year, and one will be just a standard 12-week study, still, if sufficiently positive enough to submit and get this drug approved.
Excellent. So this positive sentiment seems to be shared, given that Newron has already secured some licensing deals. So can you give us an overview of these, touch upon the financial support that they provide, and maybe cover what the commercial strategy might look like if successful with approval?
Yes. Look, Aaron, I mean, we have been telling this story for a number of years, and there's so much level of innovation in here, the glutamatergic mechanism, first of all, then going for the treatment-resistant population where nothing has worked, and clozapine is just not used for its massive side effects and administrative load for doctors and the problems for patients. And there's no add-on treatment. So 3 promises of high level of innovation, and there was just some kind of disbelief. I mean, we are swimming against the river. We have 60 years now of dopaminergic drugs. We see Cobenfy being the revolution in schizophrenia, even if it's just indirectly a dopaminergic drug. So who would believe us, a small Italian biotech company, not even Nasdaq listed? So it was very important for us to get some first validation, and that is why we said, let us go to territories that we don't deem strategic. And let's be clear, the only territory we deem strategic is the United States, because that is 50% of the world market. So let us go to a territory where we get a top 10 pharma player with some absolute excellence in CNS space, respected in CNS. Let us get enough money from down payment and non-conditional milestones, let's call it like that, enough money to pay for a substantial chunk of that pivotal program and get it started. And let us try to get a first indication of the intrinsic value of the project, because our market cap is at $150 million. Our peers, let's say by end of next year with positive results, our peer would have been Karuna, because that is the time when they were acquired. So how do we close that gap? Well, we need a first indication of intrinsic value. So we run that process, and I will say the process had an absolutely outstanding outcome in December last year, because we got a deal signed with EA Pharma/Eisai Group. And Eisai Group, we don't have to discuss. Azilect and lecanemab is evidence of their outstanding excellence in CNS. They understand what they are doing. They have done a 9 months due diligence. They know everything about the mechanism, the positioning, the market potential. And they signed that deal with us. And this deal gives them the rights to develop and commercialize evenamide in Japan and some, for us, not relevant Asian territories. In total, about 7% of the world market. But what we got was 44 cash upfront, 44 million euros cash upfront, plus 11 million called milestones, but in reality support of the first pivotal study with no conditions of relevance. So 55 million euros of cash to pay for our pivotal program. Another 62 million euros, up to, I should say, for regulatory and commercial milestones, including several indications. So Eisai, as we, does absolutely believe that this drug should not only be developed in TRS, but also in poor responders and depression, bipolar, And we believe it should work also in cognition in Alzheimer's-like patients, where all current antipsychotics are not allowed to be taken for massive side effects, risk of death. So huge amount of money on top of those 170 million euros, up to double-digit tiered royalties. So a typical deal. And on top, Eisai will run the Japanese program at their own expense. And when our guys did, the Jefferies who supported us in the transaction, did the RNPV, risk-adjusted net present value, and we got a number of about $120 million for 7% of the world market. That makes it easy to come to a first conclusion on what the intrinsic value of this project is. And that means we have hit all the click boxes, all the buttons with that deal. Then there was a second deal, I will mention that as well, a deal for South Korea, which came within very short time after the first. That is when Myung-in, which is the #1 CNS specialist in South Korea, said, look, we have gone through all this process with you. We are the #1 CNS specialist in South Korea. Why don't we partner on South Korea? And we said, yeah, that's fine. And we got the usual financial terms, which we didn't or couldn't disclose. And then we said, but what is it that you really add to this? Which is the unique point that you bring to the table? And what Myung-in said is, look, we have all the competence and resources here in South Korea. We'll add 10% of your 600 patients to your first pivotal study. And that is when it made click, and we said, that's the deal. So what we will do more deals like that, like territories like LATAM, China, India, perhaps ultimately even Europe, before or around the time when we get the phase 3 results by Q4 end of next year. We will keep the US rights. And then by end of next year, let's assume we get the results in a way that they would allow us to submit an NDA and an MAA in Europe. Then we are still the owners of the US rights. And then the capital markets conditions and our shareholders will have to take a tough decision, probably if they want to sell the company around the US rights. And we know from Intra-Cellular what the value of US rights in schizophrenia can be. Or if shareholders say, yes, we like that Intra-Cellular story very much, so why does Newron not build up a management team for a US commercialization, sell it itself for a number of years, take it to some key value, like $500–600 million of sales, as Intra-Cellular did, and then sell it to somebody like the big pharmas who bought Intra-Cellular. So that's the optionality. If things go well, and those pivotal studies show what they should show and what we saw in the phase 2 study, then I guess we have plenty of options and our shareholders will have some very good days.
Sounds good. Thanks very much, Stefan. Just before we wrap up, could you summarize for us some of the key milestones and catalysts that investors should watch out for across the next couple of years then?
Oh, absolutely. So let's start with the additional partnering deals that you might see as we go. It could be as early as in the next few months, and it could spread over the next 15 months until we get close to those results. And those deals should add additional cash, because any cash is welcome to improve and broaden our database for the NDA. Any of the safety studies that we need to run, integrating efficacy endpoints on bipolar, on depression, or on Alzheimer's will strengthen our documentation and additional validation. Now, there's one thing that obviously in the current times sounds a bit strange, which our peers had at the time when they were acquired. They were all NASDAQ listed. I understand NASDAQ right now is not today, it's not the place where you must be. But in the end, look, NASDAQ is the largest market for capital and biotech assets. We are happy with our Swiss listing, but we are missing a number of investors who do not access European or Swiss listed companies. And we want everybody in the world who is interested in top biotech to have the chance to buy Newron shares. And that is why we intend to, at a certain point in time, and obviously if the market allows it, to uplist our shares to NASDAQ. So there is no click box unleft by the time that we get those phase 3 results, and our shareholders can benefit from the true value of this compound. So a lot of news flow, a lot of challenges as usual in our industry. But look, we have an absolutely outstanding, unique compound. We have very exciting phase 2 results. We have confirming first phase 3 results, and we have a validation from a top CNS player. We are really looking forward to those next 15, 18 months. And then if positive results, well, the door is wide open to everything that biotech shareholders dream of.
Excellent. Stefan, thanks very much for the insightful discussion. I'm very much looking forward to following the progress of the ENIGMA-TRS program. For more information and analysis, we direct our audience to the Edison website, where our research is freely available. Stefan, thanks again for your time today.
Thank you, Aaron. Have a good day.